My name is Stefaan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of GovLab, an action research center based in New York City. And today I have the pleasure and delight to interview Christoph Luetge, who is a professor of business ethics at the Technical University in Munich in Bavaria, Germany. Christoph, why don't we start a little bit about yourself, and if you could briefly extend the introduction to yourself. So you're a professor of business ethics. What does that mean, and where exactly are you conducting business ethics?
So my chair is both in the School of Governance as well as in the School of Management at Technical University of Munich. And I have been doing research in business ethics for the last maybe 20 years, roughly. So my background originally was in computer science. That was my first degree I got. And then I turned to philosophy. And in particular to ethics and business ethics. Until a couple of years ago, I did not really work back into the computer science intersection, but during the last years, it turned out that the ethics of digitization, the ethics of AI now, and also of Bitcoin, blockchain, for example, turned out to be very interesting also from a business ethics perspective, and that is what I have been working on during the last years.
But before we go to the AI, I do want to focus on some of your latest work, which is on the ethics of competition, which I thought was an interesting approach. And obviously it has implications also for the ethics of competition as it relates to data. And so tell us a little bit more, what's so ethical about competition?
Right, that's what many people believe is not really the case. So that ethics can be, ethics and competition can go together. And my point, which I make in that recent book, The Ethics of Competition, which actually has a subtitle that goes like why a competitive society is good for all.
Right.
So. I believe that competition is not just something that we can that we should relate to capitalism. Capitalism, I think, has quite a negative image. It depends on the country you're working in, and the culture that you're working in. It can be different, but especially in Germany, the image of capitalism is quite a negative one for many people, let's say. But what I found over the years is that if you talk to people about competition in the sense of a fundamental way for people to work together, to live together, to a mode of living, it turns out that it's much wider than just capitalism oriented. It turns out to be a fundamental principle of sociality itself, and it can have many different appearances. So it doesn't necessarily have to have the kind of appearance that it has in a capitalist society or economy in the classical sense. But it can have. There are many modes or ways of competition. That's what I turn to in that book, and how I explain how these differ from each other and how these have their place in society.
The other element that I thought was interesting was that, which you didn't mention in your introduction, and I also failed to do, was that you also are leading an experimental ethics lab, and which I thought was interesting because, anyway, you're a philosopher, obviously, and typically philosophers aren't doing that many experiments per se, because it's typically a different kind of methodology that is being used. So tell us a little bit about the experimental aspect of your the ethics that you are studying, and also how it relates to the competition. And then we're going to go to the topic of this conference, which is, of course, around digital trust and AI.
Right. So I would say that experimental philosophy, I mean, has now become one stream of philosophy during the last maybe 10, 15 years, I would say. what they are doing is doing research into intuitions, basically. But there are a couple of areas, but intuitions, what people think about, and how people think about certain concepts in a way that might be different from what philosophical experts believe. My research is slightly different from that one. So what we do at our lab is that we use well-established methods from the social sciences, from economics, from social psychology, to do research on concepts and theories, phenomena that have some ethical impact. For example, competition. So we try to replicate certain situations of competition in the lab and see what happens actually. Not just what the philosopher thinks might be the case, or the theoretical social scientist thinks, but what happens. For example, we mostly think that the losers punish the winners if they have the chance to do so. In a competitive setting. But what we found, for example, is that sometimes also the winners punish the losers, which is slightly counterintuitive, I would say. And things are like that. Those are some of the situations that we try to research in our lab.
And one of the other aspects which I thought was very interesting in examining some of your writings was about the concept of order ethics and versus moral surplus, and so it seems to be like it's a fundamental concept of your work, because it's like it's really where you have distinguished yourself. So can you, in like a very short period, explain what you mean by order ethics, and then how it applies to then the more recent work, for instance?
Right. So the order ethics approach has been developed mostly in the German research scene already maybe 20, 25 years ago, and the most. And it is an approach that is mostly concerned with business ethics, obviously. And the idea is to say that the order framework of a society, so especially the economic rules that a society gives themselves, have an important impact on ethics, on the way business is done in that society, on the way that that ethics, on the location that we look for ethics. So because commonly we look for ethics in the motives of people, in motivations of people, and are they ethical or are they unethical? And in the order ethics framework, we place emphasis on the different locus, where that we say the framework of a society. It doesn't always have to be the legal framework. It could also be a more informal framework, where we can also see ethics being located. That means, for example, that certain laws, but also informal norms of a society have some ethical value in themselves. For example, in the way they allow for competition, for fair competition, and rule out unfair competition, or in the way that they put more pressure on the companies to innovate more, for example, or also to distribute wealth in a fairer way, but in this way, we slightly move away the focus on the motivations, and that is something that I think is commonly done in ethics. So like where you put the focus on the motivations, and I think this does not work when you look at companies. So you can look at individual motivations of the CEO, of the board, or whatever, or all the members or the high-level managers of a company, whatever. But I think that this doesn't get you anywhere actually in assessing whether the actions of that company and the responsibility that they assumed for themselves or not is valid or is there actually. So I think it is this order ethics approach is quite helpful in dealing with business ethics, where we do not just deal with individual people or small groups, but with large companies and even societies.
And does it also apply to the more recent aspects of your work, which, I mean, you were a member of the Autonomous Vehicles Committee, for instance. How does that translate to the AI, anyway, automated decision space, for instance?
I think actually that translation is very important because we've now seen a number of ethics approaches to AI and to those other new technologies related to it. But many of them, or let's say a substantial number of them, do not really take into account that it will be companies and large companies that will be implementing those technologies or already are implementing those. And what does it mean to require for certain ethical principles, ethical guidelines in a large company, either from the traditional industry sector or from the AI or Silicon Valley sector? Whatever it is, we need to take into account certain the ways that these companies work, and that it is not so simple as saying, well, here are the principles 1 to 20, and we would like you to implement them, so do it. That will be too simple, and I think business ethics can be of help here. Because we have done that during the last decades, and helping how to establish ethics within especially large companies, because there you need all kinds of tools. Ethics is not just a thing of persons, of individual persons anymore, but of structures, of organizational principles and measures.
Which comes to a question I had as well, and it's great that you indicated the tools necessary. So, because a big question of ethics is to make it actionable, and so how do you go about making ethics actionable, especially within a corporate setting and especially in the technical sphere?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that depends on the individual situation and on the company that we are dealing with. But so it could work on different levels. So, for example, some standard tools that many or probably most big companies have in place are codes of conduct, for example, certain maybe ethics officers, or it might be called differently, which are responsible for implementing a certain set of organizational principles. You need, but often you need more. For example, I'm involved in a project currently where actually the goal is to change ultimately the climate within a company, which is not so simple. So you can't just put the principles on the wall and say, well, now please work accordingly. But you have to change the way. You can't directly change the way that people think from now to tomorrow. But you can try to make a difference by establishing incentives, for example, by establishing incentives for managers in order to take certain principles into account. So you can have a catalog of number 1 to 10, points number 1 to 10, and if you take these into account, then you get certain incentive, for example. You can have trainings for managers on ethics trainings, which I have been involved in a lot. And I'm not claiming that all these tools will directly make you all better or more ethical, but I think if you do this regularly, it changes the culture, and that will be of some music. It creates awareness within the company, and people start to think differently.
Let's go to the, so one of the latest developments you're part of is the creation of this new research institute for ethics in AI. So, so what are the kinds of challenges or ethical questions that you are particularly interested in?
Right. So certainly, so we have a list actually of research focus areas, and one of them will be biases of algorithms, fairness of algorithms. I mean, this is one of the key issues I think that is also being looked at in many countries, and we will. What we will do is to look at these and other topics from different angles. So we'll have teams from the different departments. So always someone from the engineering or informatics department working together with someone from the social sciences or ethics or governance department, and looking at different aspects of the problem. And another area would be accountability and responsibility of these technologies. What does it mean, for example, to make an AI system explicable or explainable, as some of the for example, the high-level expert group for ethics for AI has been working on. One of the principles is this explicability. But what does it mean for a concrete algorithm, for a concrete system, and so on? And we are trying to focus on these and related areas.
So ethics and AI, or data ethics especially, also quite often gets into the questions of what are the risks of using the technology, and then what are the ethics as it relates to either being aware or preventing the risks. But what is anyway, from your point of view, is there also an ethical aspect as it relates to the risk of not using AI and data? Because clearly we know that data and AI has a value to society. So what is anyway, is there an ethical aspect of not using or misuse of the AI and data sphere?
Indeed, there is, and I think this relates quite a lot to my work on competition, because I believe a competition can do a lot of things for us, can be a very valuable tool, and the same holds for AI. In many discussions that I am involved in, it's exactly like you said. So people point directly to risks 1 to 30, and you don't even get a chance to explore further what this technology might do for you, not just in terms of economic benefits, but in terms of ethics, actually. So I also believe that these technologies, in many ways, can prevent many accidents, injuries, fatalities. They can help us to distribute actually many things. The benefits of technologies in a much broader way, because they often come at not that great cost. They can make our daily lives much more, much. Maybe even richer, but also more. We can be more mobile. We can be more flexible. We can do more things, and so I think these technologies have a lot of promise in themselves. And one of them that you mentioned, I was working on, that was the autonomous driving, where I think the benefits are very obvious. So if we manage to substantially reduce the fatalities, which are by over 90% of them are caused by human errors, I think there is a very good argument actually for working further on these technologies and coming up with the necessary rules, because I think those rules will be necessary. order ethics point of view. Some order framework will be necessary in order to get those the benefits, in order, in this case, to gain the acceptance of people.
So last question relates with the institute as well. And again, the institute got a lot of news, mainly because there was a particular kind of funder that stepped up and decided to invest. And so it was Facebook, of course, that many know. And so lately we've seen a variety of discussions where, anyway, a few corporations are funding research in AI, for instance, or research in the ethics of AI, or in data and AI. And so there is also a claim here that this might challenge ethical principles as it relates to research. So how do you, as a both a business ethics person, but also a academic researcher, how does that play out from your point of view?
So first, I need to say there is no obligation towards the company Facebook whatsoever for our research institute. So we get the funding for doing ethics of AI or in AI in whatever way that we come up with. And I think if we manage in this way to make AI systems more fair or more accountable and more secure, for example, I think many people will have the benefits of these systems, and so I think it is quite a good idea actually to use the money in this way. But I certainly see the point that we also, which is, I think, in many ways not only partly recognized, that we need to take up the dialogue with those companies that are working on the technologies, that have in the past years been developing these technologies quite far. And I think it's important that we talk to them and talk to them about the problems that they have, that they also recognize they have, and see what kind of ethical principles, and not just on the highly theoretical level, but also on the more concrete level, we can come up to in order to improve their systems and others too. So we will certainly work on similar problems that some of those companies are facing.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.